my name's Kelvin and welcome back to another watercolor tutorial for Procreate. So today I've got a really interesting and easy project for you guys to try. It's a kind of a bookmark basically, and it's this sort of greenish forest scene with these birds and kind of the distant mountain back there. And it's pretty abstract, and this is one of my favorite things to paint because it just takes a few minutes, but the result is just so satisfying. Now I'm going to start out with a blank watercolor paper texture, and I'm also going to use the regular watercolor brush kit, and I'll put links to everything I use in the description down below. The first thing I'm going to do is grab the abstract round brush, and then I'm going to find a kind of a medium desaturated green color, but I want it to be a kind of a yellowy green, and I'm just going to make a quick wash at the largest brush size. And after that, I'm going to go over it again, so it'll be a little bit darker, but I'm going to focus that on the bottom. And after that, I'm going to grab the water blender brush, and I'm going to try to mix this up a little bit, so it's more like a smooth ombre kind of gradient. Next, I want to give the impression that there's kind of light from the sun sort of cutting through this green mist. So I'm going to grab the selection tool and set it to freehand and just make a selection like this. And I'll feather it out quite a bit. Then I'm going to go to hue, saturation, and brightness for that layer. And I'm going to make it a little bit brighter, a little bit more saturated, and then I'm going to shift this towards yellow just a little bit. And that'll give the illusion that we have some kind of sunlight sort of cutting through. Next, I'm going to go to the Aquarelle bonus set. And if you have the regular brush kit, you already have the bonus set. And all it is like when you download the watercolor brush kit, the regular brush kit is obvious, it's right in front. But if you go into the folder called Extras and Updates, you'll see the Aquarelle bonus set. And that has a bunch of kind of random, kind of very specialized brushes. And for this part here, I'm going to use the Quick Pine brush. And I'm going to set the color to be a little bit of a darker version of that same green. And I'm going to use this brush almost at the maximum size. And just down here at the bottom on a separate layer, I'm just going to draw some pine trees real quick. That looks pretty good, and I want those to be sort of out of focus or kind of blurry. So I'm going to go to my effects menu here, and I'm going to go to Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to apply Gaussian Blur to that whole layer, and I'll just slide it. And you know, the more you slide, the more blurry it gets. I want it to be just barely out of focus, as if I was painting this on wet watercolor and it just sort of spread out on its own. And after that, I'm going to make a new layer. And using that same Quick Pine brush and that same color, I'm going to add another layer of trees. And you can see they kind of disappear. So what I'm going to do is first, on the new trees, I'm going to change the layer transparency mode to multiply. And that'll make them darker right away. And I can use the arrow tool here, and I can kind of reposition those a little bit better. There we go. And I'll lower the opacity of that layer just a little bit, just so they're not like almost totally black. That looks pretty good. And then remember the blurry trees in the back. I'm going to lower those as well, just so I can barely see them back there. Now that looks pretty good. I just want to add some birds now, so I'm going to make a new layer on top of everything. And I'm going to select a kind of darker green color. And this time I'm going to go back to the regular watercolor brush kit, and I'm going to grab the fine liner pen. And just at maybe 20% or so, I'm just going to draw some really simple birds up here. Next, I want to add a kind of faint silhouette of a mountain in kind of the distant background. So I'm going to go to the layers panel and select the one we did in the first place, the sort of background wash. And I'm going to grab the selection tool and set it to freehand. And I'm just going to try to sketch out just the barest hint of a kind of mountain range back there. There we go. And to make that stand out, I'm going to go to the hue, saturation, and brightness for that layer. And I think what I'll do is I'll just darken it a little bit. And also I'm going to shift the hue just a little bit towards blue. And that'll kind of give the illusion that just there's something going on back there. And if that looks a little bit too harsh, what you can do is grab the water blender and at a medium size, just sort of soften it up in a few areas. And this looks pretty good. I think I'm done with the scene. So what I'm going to do is merge everything together onto one layer, and I'm going to cut it into a bookmark shape. Now there's a number of ways to do that, but I think my favorite way, the easiest way, is just by using the selection tool. So I'm going to grab the selection tool, and I'm going to set it to rectangle. And if I just sort of zoom out here and draw a rectangular selection like this, it'll show me where I have some problems. So right away I can see that, you know, I have this kind of white area, and I'd like to shift the whole selection over that way. So I'm going to also have white over here. So what I'm going to do first is grab that water blender again, and I'm just going to pull out the corners that sort of don't fit into this selection, and then I'll do the selection again. There we go. So I'll grab the selection tool again and try it. So this time it lines up much better. So I like that selection, and I'll just go down here and click copy and paste. And what it did is it just cut out that rectangle and placed it on a different layer. So I can see that by going to my layers panel, and here's the original one, and then when we copied it, we have this square version here. And this could be done. You could go ahead and print this out, but just for extra credit, I want to show you a couple more techniques to make this look more realistic. So right away, if I zoom in here, you can see the edge is just kind of like too sharp. It's not realistically sharp for watercolor. And there's a trick here. I think it's best if I demonstrate it on the top edge. If I go to the eraser brush and change that to the fine liner pen, what I can do is just make a line like this. And then if I stay pressed on the screen, it will let me sort of reposition that line. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just drew a line. I didn't care how straight it was, but I just held the position at the end, and after a moment, it kind of snapped into a straight line. So I'm going to use that to kind of sort of just rough up the top edge like that, and I'll do the same thing to the bottom. So I just sort of draw a line with the eraser, and it's not perfect, but if I hold the position, I can sort of position it like this. There we go. And I'm just going to do that to the other two edges. Now all that this does is it just turns that super laser sharp edge into something a little more rough, a little more realistic. And the last thing I want to do, the last trick, is I want to give this a darker, harder edge. And you could do that manually by just drawing a sort of darker green color along the edge, but there's a trick to speed up your workflow here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the selection tool, but this time I'm going to change it to automatic. And I'm just going to zoom in here so it's easier to see on the video, but I'm going to click and drag out here on the white. And when I do that, it becomes blue. And it's just saying, the blue just means it's selected. And when I click and drag, it sort of changes the threshold. So I'm just going to select it like that, just up to the edge. And then I'm going to feather it. And I'm going to feather it just past the edge, right? And now watch what happens when I go to hue, saturation, and brightness for that layer. So I'll darken it a little bit, and I'll saturate it. And now I'll deselect it. And when I zoom out, you can see now I have this sort of darker, harder watercolor edge. And that's it. This one is all done. As you can see, it prints out really nicely, and you could print this out at any size. Just for me, I have kind of a small printer. I think a bookmark is suitable for this kind of painting. But of course, if you had a larger printer or you wanted to have it professionally printed, you could print this much, much larger. And that pretty much wraps it up. Please give this video a like if you like this tutorial, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But other than that, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.